everyone. I'm Victoria Male. I am not Joaquin, but I am a writer and producer that will be the guest moderator today for the Hollywood Editing Mentors first Emmy contender panel. I am so happy to be here to host this conversation with these talented editors. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. First up, she's an editor on the Amazon Prime film MÚSICA. Please welcome Melissa Kent.
Hi, that's me. Nice to meet you, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Next up, we have an editor on Amazon's spinoff The Boys called Gen B. Please welcome Maura Corey, ACE.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
I know, I'm excited too. Next up, we have an editor on Hulu's SPERMWORLD. Please welcome Daniel Garber.
Hi, thanks for having me. Feel very lucky to be surrounded by all these amazing editors.
Likewise, because I can't edit to save my life, so I feel like I'm very safe here. And then next we have the producer and editor on Netflix's Escaping Twin Flames. Please welcome Inbal B. Lessner, ACE.
Hi, Victoria and everybody. I'll edit to save your life any day.
Thank you so much. I need it. And then last but certainly not least, of course, we have an editor on Netflix's GRISELDA with us. Please welcome Joaquin Elizondo.
Hey, what's going on, Victoria? Hello, everyone. Good to see some familiar and then new faces as well.
Yes, and thank you so much for handing over the reins to me for this episode. I'm really excited in this panel to be a part of it. I say we jump right in. So I'm going to ask, my first question for y'all is, can you each briefly tell us about the projects you have up for Emmy contention? How about Melissa kicks it off for us?
Sure. So MÚSICA is a movie that's directed by Rudy Mancuso. He also co-wrote it and is the composer and executive producer, and it's based on his life. Rudy is a Brazilian American who has a condition called synesthesia. And what that is when your senses kind of cross. And a common form is people who might hear a pitch or a tone and they might see a color. And other people might hear a word and it makes them taste citrus. In Rudy's case, he turns everyday sounds of the world into rhythm, into music in his mind. He can't control when it starts and stops, but this has infused this incredible creativity in his life. So our story, based on a true story, and as we say in the opening title, unfortunately, takes you inside his mind with the way he perceives the world as the story unfolds. They call it a non-musical musical because people are not breaking into song, but because he organizes the world into music and into rhythm, periodically, the people, in a diner, in a park, at the fair, it will evolve into this like massive dance and percussion number, and it will take his attention away from the story, the plot. Another thing that's really unique about it, besides the puppets and the occasional scene or line in Portuguese, is because he's Brazilian American and it's based on his life. It's shot in Newark, New Jersey, where he grew up. It's shot in his childhood home. His real mother plays his mother, and Maria Mancuso practically steals the show. So it's just a really fun, entertaining comedy, rom-com, but a kind of a non-traditional rom-com, and also for sure a non-musical musical.
That's amazing. I'm also I'm a Jersey girl, so I love to hear that.
Me too.
Taking a sharp left turn, Daniel, do you want to tell us about SPERMWORLD?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess FX let us get away with calling a feature documentary SPERMWORLD, so that is already a victory in my book. It's a film directed by my dear friend Lance Oppenheim, whose first feature, Some Kind of Heaven, I also edited. And this is a very different film from that one. I mean, that was about retirees contemplating people at the ends of their lives. And this is a film that is about people trying to create babies in a very unusual way. So it's sort of a road movie of sorts, and it takes us into this wild west of black market sperm donation. So there are sperm donors who basically meet their recipients over these groups on Facebook. Like tens of thousands of people join these groups, and people will meet up in parking lots or motel rooms and hand off genetic material to create new lives. And so the film basically follows a few different storylines within that world, basically tracing the efforts of some prospective parents and a few serial sperm donors. So It's a very unusual kind of situation, but I think Lance is really skilled at finding a lot of humanity in these sort of unusual circumstances.
Yeah, definitely unusual, but then also so essential and universal because it's the creation of life.
Exactly.
Inbal, can you tell us about your project?
Escaping Twin Flames is a 3-part documentary series that premiered last November on Netflix. It follows the story of a still active, seemingly innocuous online school for love, whose leaders coerce their followers into changing genders. So we start with how these members find the group, get recruited, and then slowly indoctrinated and go deep into this rabbit hole of a group where the leader claims to be the second coming of Christ, among other things. They are controlled emotionally, physically. They control their diet. They control who they get to be with and not be with. Everything from their procreation to sexuality and gender expression. And in the end, we see how some of the former members manage to wake up and get out and recover from being in the group, and how they're trying to seek justice and bring them down.
That is so intense and harrowing, and it's great that you were part of the team that brought that story to life. Similarly, in let's stay dark and seedy for a moment. Joaquin, tell us about GRISELDA.
So GRISELDA is a Netflix limited series about this Colombian woman by the name of Griselda Blanco, who in the late 70s, early 80s established her drug empire, trafficking cocaine in Miami. So Griselda is played by Sofia Vergara, and this was her first dramatic role, obviously known as someone who has was a long time on Modern Family, right? For her comedy chops, is now playing this more, obviously, playing this darker role with this woman again that escaped Colombia from her abusive husband with her 3 children, came to the United States, and again got into the drug trafficking business in the 70s and 80s there in Miami. And so we see the rise and fall of Griselda Blanco in this 6-part series. And I think that after each episode, it's going to have you running to Google and asking yourself, is that true? Did that happen? Because it's a lot of it did.
I was very guilty of that when I was watching the series because I'm a history buff. So I'm like, wait, is that real? And then again, last but certainly not least, Maura, can you please tell us about Gen B?
Yeah, Gen B is, I wouldn't say it's a spin-off of The Boys. I mean, it is a spin-off, but it's really in the universe of The Boys, where we follow our main character, Marie Moreau, who goes to Godolphin University, which is a place where superheroes learn to be superheroes or actors, which is pretty hilarious. But it follows the exploits of Marie and her roommate, Emma, and Kate, and Andre, and Sam, and they each have their different powers, and they uncover a conspiracy. The school is hiding a experimental hospital underneath the school, and they're experimenting on soups, trying to basically see what makes them vulnerable. So it's pretty bloody, just like The Boys, which was a lot of fun. A lot of satire, which is really, and it's a really funny, bloody, sad show.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for giving, the Reader's Digest version of your projects. I'm excited to get into each of them a little more deeply with you all. For each of these Emmy contending projects, what specific scene or sequence are you the most proud of and why? I think I'm going to go backwards and ask Maura what scene she's most proud of.
So there are so many cool scenes to edit on the 2 episodes I got to do, but I think one I'm really proud of is really the opening of the finale 108 called Guardians of Godolphin, which we had just seen in the episode before. We have come off of our character Kate, who can push people to do anything she wants. and she had her mentor slit her own throat. So in the opening, there's a dead body on the floor, but we start on Kate's face to establish not only can she hear everybody, she can hear everybody's thoughts, but also the anxiety of the situation that she basically just killed her mother figure. So in that sequence, we played around with this a lot, but I came up with the idea of just doing these jump cuts to make her feel fragmented, and they're really quick series of jump cuts. And then she looks around the room with everybody in this tableau staring at the dead Dean. And in a moment's notice, she just shuts her eyes and all the sound goes out, and then we reset. So we start with this huge moment, and then we can go ease into what is now the scene of the aftermath of this murder.
Wow.
Yeah.
A beautiful way of like weaving plot and emotion all like so beautifully together.
To me, it was that idea that when you show what the person's feeling inside rather than, you're telling it through a visual language, right? So making sure that the character you feel the character's pain and anxiety through these jump cuts. And we continued that theme a little bit throughout her character choices throughout that episode. So
amazing. What about you, Joaquin? You and Griselda.
Yeah, so there's a scene in episode 3 that I remember when I first even got the dailies. I loved it right away, and it was so fun to cut. But at this point in the series, Griselda has established herself in Miami, and people back in Colombia, big cocaine suppliers are taking notice, right? So they're offering her a buyout. Here's $15 million to go away, right? But of course, Griselda saying, you know what? I'm not going anywhere, right? And so wants to convince the local dealers that they should not take the buyout, right? And so it's a very long dialogue scene. It's Griselda in the Mutiny Club at the center, surrounded by, many male local dealers, right? Trying to convince them that to not take this buyout. And so it really, this scene was seen at the dailies, was their strong performance, right? And more so from the fact that coming from comedy, right? Again, going back to this, the fact that Griselda, that Sophia now is taking on this dramatic role, and seeing just her transforming into this character, seeing it happening, to me just had a huge impact, on me. And I really latched on to just the strength, the power of her voice, giving this speech to all these people, and really just the cadence of her voice and the rhythm that to me just really again I just latched onto and created a certain pace for the scene that kept it moving despite it just being like long dialogue scene. But I think in general it's just that it was that transformation happening, right? And that really she's doing it. Sophia is doing it, and she did kill it. And so at this point, it was just at this point in the story for me was the power in her performance and driving the scene along, especially being surrounded by, again, this male world of drug dealers, right? Just establish her prominence in Miami at that time. And I thought it was just a beautiful performance by Sophia.
That's so wonderful and so moving. I've never really thought of like how the actor and the editor work together. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. Melissa, what about you and MÚSICA?
Well, I think one scene that I'd like to highlight in MÚSICA is one of the first times that the character of Rudy is getting to know Isabella, a woman he's just met and that he's interested in, played by Camila Mendez. This was the first 2 days of shooting. And ordinarily on the first day of shooting, you would hope for a scene at the university where the professor wraps up his lecture and everyone is sitting still. But no, we have 30 rhythm performers in the park. And this is a huge set piece where Rudy is explaining to really someone for the first time how he perceives the world and what it feels like. And he even admits, she asks, do you enjoy it or is it torture? And he's like, sometimes it's nice and sometimes it's not. But we show the audience, as he's showing Isabella, what it's like. And so in the park, we have people playing basketball, jumping rope, seesaw, monkey bars, playing soccer, painting graffiti, et cetera, et cetera. And he's teaching her how to listen. And everything he brings to a freeze, to a halt. And one by one, he has them start up. And in this particular case of what we're calling MÚSICA, which is when this condition is sort of taking over his perception, he paired it with orchestral instruments. And so we have a cello with the basketball, like boom, with each bounce. And as he adds more and more, then he adds a jump rope, then he adds a little soccer, then he adds a seesaw, and more instruments are joining the symphony. So eventually it's this huge rhythm and dance number. And as he brings it to a halt, he looks at her, she says, wow, I can feel you feeling it. And with hope, he's like, so you heard it? You could hear it? And she says, no. And he just falls in disappointment. And that frame was really funny of him with his head on his table. I sent it to my assistant. I want to call out the wonderful Jill Piwawar, who organized the hell out of that scene for me, because I think that's how she felt getting those very, very complicated dailies on day one. And it really is also a scene that's close to my heart because Rudy, having edited his own YouTube videos, which is how he became well known before this movie, and they're 5 or 6 minutes a pop. This is his first time working with a feature film editor, and he already had so many hats going on with this movie. He knew he couldn't take on the additional responsibility of editing the movie itself. But when he saw that scene, he reached out to me. They were shooting in New Jersey, but he reached out to me and he said, that is as close to how I could have ever imagined that being cut. It's exactly spot on the way I hoped it would be. And so from that moment, I just knew that we had a really similar aesthetic and that we would get along amazing. And we did.
What an amazing endorsement and way to begin your collaboration.
Thank you.
Daniel, of course. Daniel, tell me about SPERMWORLD.
Ooh, it's always hard to pick just one scene or sequence in a movie like this, especially because it is kind of an ensemble movie. It's got 3 different storylines. But I think one that's always really fun for me to watch other people watching is sort of toward the end of the film. One of our main subjects, this guy Ari, is an extremely prolific sperm donor. He has, I think at this point, over 150 kids by hundreds of parents. He was sort of raised in this Orthodox Jewish family. And he's completely broken from his family because they, of course, really don't approve of the number of kids that he's fathered. And he's often completely overwhelmed by these obligations that he's created for himself. So this scene sort of takes place at a birthday party that he basically throws for himself. And he invites as many kids as he can in the tri-state area. And many of them show up. And you just see him surrounded by, his creations or kids he's contributed to at the very least. And you just sort of get this visual sense of how incapable he is of dealing with the reality of what he's created. He's so addicted to donating because he loves this feeling of creating life and making people, helping people achieve their dreams. I think it really brings him a lot of joy, but he's also, I think, trapped in some ways by his compulsion to donate. And so I think that the scene was really fun to cut in so many ways, just because there are so many kids who deliver these incredible, very real performances as children. And I also think that there's just something very tonally strange about this scene, because you get both the sense of the tragedy and all of the difficulties that Ari has to deal with day in, day out as somebody who tries to actually keep up with his many donor children, as well as the humor of being surrounded by these kids all the time. And I think it's a scene that people walk away with at the end of the movie and really remember Ari by this really absurd kind of surreal scene that I think a fiction film could not have represented better.
Yeah, no, the word that kept coming to mind is this is so absurd, this is so surreal. And absurd, not this is absurd, but in the tone of Harold Pinter or Beckett. That's amazing. That's so, again, bizarre, but kind of beautiful. Inbal, what about you and Twin Flames?
Well, like Daniel said, it's so hard to choose, right? It's like choosing which child is your favorite. I love them all. And I co-created, as you mentioned, the series with my producing partner, Cecilia Peck, who also directed the series. And I'm really proud of every single frame. But if I had to choose, towards the middle of episode 3, Keely, one of our main contributors, really smart, college-educated, wonderful person, is getting sucked into this group and very quickly promoted to a CEO and kind of made to be a poster child for this cult. And as is common within cults, she's used by the cult leaders. She's not only abused herself, but she used to control and abuse other members and kind of do their dirty work, which, again, it's a common cult dynamic that's quite difficult to explain. And she was very brave to be willing to face that and come to terms with that on camera with us. And so towards the middle of episode 3, she tells the story of being assigned by the cult leader to watch documentaries about the NXIVM cult and tell him why he is not, write an essay of why he is not like Keith Raniere, the leader of NXIVM. And she actually watched Seduced, which is the last cult series I produced with Cecilia. And it contributed to her waking up. So for us, it was super meta. I mean, when I heard this story, I was like, okay, this is going in. I mean, for our previous documentary to play a real role in her starting to use her critical thinking and wake up and leave this group was incredibly powerful. And so we put together this scene where it's combining her interview, but also this animated recreation that we love. Wow. And then it sends her on a path where she's leaving, she's starting to speak out. So you see her TikTok videos from the time as she was starting to speak out publicly. And then she goes and speaks to Dr. Janja Lalich, our cult expert, which she found organically through social media. And she really starts to come to terms with her role in the group. And eventually that sequence takes her to Angie to make amends to one of the former members she was used to hurt. And she was coercing her into transitioning and being with somebody she didn't choose to be with. So I love that sequence, and I love our partnership with Keely and how we told this story.
Yeah, I can only imagine it was a big responsibility to kind of portray that amount of vulnerability she showed and to honor that. Especially if your other that's wild. Like, again, like as a writer, I'm like, I couldn't come up with that. I'd get a note being like, that's too unrealistic.
No, you can't write this. I know we were supposed to keep clean language. This is why documentaries are so fantastic, because you can't write this S word,
No,
it's
truly.
Unbelievable.
The truth is often stranger than fiction.
Always.
But quickly going back to Newark, New Jersey. Melissa, with music being obviously such a huge part of MÚSICA, how did that impact the timing and the flow of the edit, given obviously like the rhythm of everything?
Music informs almost every moment of this movie. So in many different ways. One example is where I'm taking everyday sounds and building a little rhythmic transition. For example, Rudy runs up the stairs and is like, stomp, 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 slam the door, clap hands, light comes on. So it's just like 5 beats, and it takes us from one scene to another. And that's us building a rhythm from just everyday sounds. Another example is where he's walking through the Ironbound Fair, and he's having his first real deep conversation with Isabella, walking through the streets. And we have, I guess you could call it underscore playing. And it was a really fine line about how loud to make it, because on the one hand, to be realistic to his experience, it would be on the loud side. But then for an audience, you have to be wary that it's not so distracting that they can't pay attention to the most important thing, which is the dialogue. But as they approach closer and closer into the fair and through the fair, not only are the sounds getting louder, but all the vendors selling their, watermelons and drinks, etc., on the grill are starting to perform rhythmically as his synesthesia is feeling stronger and stronger. And the interesting thing is, because the character of Rudy is conflicted about what to do when he graduates school, whether to move to the city and have sort of the more traditional job and life that his ex-girlfriend envisions for him. And Isabella is opening his eyes to the beauty of and the vibrancy of his own culture of Brazilian Americans who live in the Ironbound neighborhood of Newark. So as they're going through the fair, it's becoming more and more musical until it explodes in this dance number. But maybe the trickiest way I had to deal with music is in a scene that takes place in Brasilia Grill, which is a real restaurant where this really went down, where he's about to have dinner with his ex, and to sort of explain, like, this is not happening, we are done. And he bumps into Isabella, who's waiting for takeout. So it's a lot of physical comedy. It was quite a long scene as written, maybe even like 15 pages. And it's essentially 6 scenes in one, though. So my challenge first is he's bouncing between these tables. So we have our dialogue scenes, and it does get pretty funny. So I'm cutting for humor, I'm cutting for story. But meanwhile, the live piano player, Marcio, can see both tables and is giving him the side eye as this thing is, he's not behaving quite as honorably as he should. But Marcio was playing live on the day. And in fact, I do want to mention that all of these rhythm numbers, all of this MÚSICA, these performers were playing these rhythms live on the day, and they were recorded with up to 100 microphones for pristine sound. So that's a whole story. And every one of those microphones was placed by our executive music producer, Jamie Rise. It's an absolutely stunning soundscape that he created. But back to Brasilia and our live piano player. So as I'm tightening these scenes, because I knew I couldn't have a 15-minute scene, there were moments where the music had landed in a really entertaining way, and I wanted to preserve those. So of course, you cut dialogue, you want to preserve how the music is later down the line, you got to figure out a way to make music edit. So to have 6 various scenes that you're finally getting like nice and tight dialogue-wise, and also for momentum, faster, but all having to accommodate music edits. And anytime I cut to Marcio playing piano, it has to either match exactly or look convincing, look real. So if I'm hearing high notes, I can't have his hands all the way to the left, for example. Then Marcio and Rudy have what we call the musical conversation. So they basically are having ESP with subtitles via music. So Marcio is very sarcastically playing a little riff, and we put a subtitle, like, what are you doing? You should tell her the truth, things like that. And Rudy's responding by tapping and clicking with his silverware on his glass and what have you, all subtitled. And so I had to get in and out of those riffs and in and out of those rhythms perfectly musically. And our music department is always, you got to stay on the grid. They were relentless about the grid, basically staying exactly in time. So, I was balancing a lot between making the conversations tight, making the cuts to Marcio look correct, and then also musically getting in and out of all these moments. And then at the mix, I don't remember exactly whose idea it was, but in order to help the momentum of this long scene, every time he changed his location, because the music was recorded in a MIDI keyboard, we were able to raise the key a half step. So it's very subtle, but as it evolves, it's like the music's just getting a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. And then his mom shows up and no more music.
I'm just going to be honest. The logistics of this makes me want to cry. And I have all the respect in the world. Like, if I was in charge of that, I would have been like in a corner, like crying. So that's like my hats off.
It's like the most fun I could ever have. And Rudy said to me many times, thank God you speak music, because he would like beatbox a moment to me and be like, okay, when this happens, I want to see this. And so I'd sometimes listen to like 2.5 minutes and be like, I'm going to find it. Okay, I got it. All right, let's do that thing. So it was honestly like my dream.
Maura, how do you think editing affects tone in a project, especially when like Gen B, and that's in the boys universe and is really known for its distinctive stylized tone?
Yeah, I mean, Gen B is a satire. So you are mixing comedy, drama, social, social social things in there as well. So editing absolutely has a huge part of it, because one scene will be funny and the next scene will be dramatic and then the next scene will be action. All of those have to be approached in a different manner. So obviously for the drama scenes, you want to make sure you're landing all the emotional moments. So like in the finale in Gen V 108, there's a scene where two characters break up and they're in this dark theater, and it is a fight that when the dailies came in, I was just like, whoa, these actors' chemistry is off the charts. They are doing such a great job. And it was just about landing these emotional moments to a point where one of the characters, she can get big or small, but to do that, she either has to throw up or eat. That's usually how she gets big or small. But she gets so demeaned by this man who's breaking up with her that she shrinks on her own without realizing it. So this is, to me, one of the beautiful things about working with visual effects and, these drama moments. So we see her in this moment. You see the VFX artist did a great job. In the background, you'd see the background shrink, but not her. And then we did this camera pull out. She's literally has these giant clothes on. And in the moment, she's like, what the F? And then it starts to get funny because she's like, what happened? And then we cut out to then go into this huge action scene of chaos on the campus with Soups killing humans and people fighting. And so you need a very specific touch to go from these emotional scenes to this funny stuff to then action scenes, which is super fast cut, without getting emotional whiplash. So that sets a tone that's the tone, right? Because you're switching tones all the time. You want to make sure that it has a level of cohesiveness in order for the audience to believe this, feel it, laugh at it, and then also be like, when somebody's head explodes, go, what? So it's a lot of juggling performances and how the pacing goes fast, goes slow. And like I said, action scenes are always so fun to cut because, you're dealing with 12-frame edits that actually don't look like mistakes. They actually make sense,
Wow.
As opposed to the drama scenes, which you're holding on faces for that moment of clarity. So.
Amazing. You have to use all the tools in your toolbox, it sounds like.
You do. Yep. And to me, the show is so funny because of all these other things that are around it. Does that make sense?
Totally. Inbal, as an executive producer and editor on Escaping Twin Flames, can you tell us about how you manage those roles and if being a producer influenced your time in the editing process and your approach to it?
Yeah, I think it makes all the difference. I'm able to select the editors that I think are right for the show and have sort of a 20-foot overview of the process on, and this series was done so quickly that we had to shoot and edit at the same time. And so while my partner Cecilia was in sort of show running field and on all the shoots, I would supervise them remotely or monitor them remotely and then translate that into the edit. Instead of having each of my 3 editors cut one episode, I had them cut one character arc. And so each of them cut one character arc throughout the whole story from episode 1 to the end. And I cut the 4th arc. And then only once we were done and had like 4 really strong arcs, we started, scrambling and putting together the storyboard and having each editor in charge of one episode. And so while they're reworking scene by scene, I can still stay and work with the archival team to find the missing pieces and work with the field team to still get the footage we're missing and work with the animation and legal for all those issues. But yeah, I just want to give kudos to our phenomenal ace-winning editing team, Kevin Hebard, Mimi Wilcox, Martine Bean, and then at the end, Troy Takaki, AC, who joined us for picture finishing. And they were just phenomenal. And really my job was to get everybody working well together, like a well-oiled machine, the archive people and story people and field people, and how we can create a team that was constantly debating and figuring out ways to tell this story in the most compelling way, but also ethically with a lot of heart and a lot of consideration for the former members and family members that trusted us with these really painful stories.
Wow. It felt like you were spinning, like when you're just describing the process to me, like, are there any plates that Inbal is not spinning with this project? And I think it really shows in the documentary how beautifully everything came together.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Joaquin, in Griselda, how did you use editing to enhance character development and audience connection with her? You gave us a great insight in kind of leveraging Sophia's performance, especially in that big scene in episode 3. Are there any other moments that feel particularly character rich?
Yeah, well, I mean, for this series, talking to director Annie Baez before starting, the project, the discussion was, we want to be in Griselda's world. We want to follow her, be with her children, right? So it was a lot, obviously, in the pacing. I mean, in the scenes, and really sitting with our characters and living these moments. It was really just spending a lot of time in these shots. Beautiful cinematography by Armando Salas, ASC. And so it was just a joy to work with that footage because we had, beautiful, long tracking shots, pushing in on characters' faces, and just living these beautiful moments that we could sit in for a while. But also, I mean, sure, it's a very dark series, but also there's a lot of comedic moments, right? Obviously, then same thing, a lot of action. So it was a lot of playing then with that rhythm and the pacing, having that liberty. And also just simply knowing that it's taking place in the late 70s, early 80s Miami, right? You're gonna have a lot of fun, and same thing, a lot of great music. And Andy is huge on music, and so I knew it was that from the get-go was gonna have a lot of fun with just finding the right pacing and the rhythm. And I think for example, just doing the first episode. Which you're trying to find, that kind of the tone, the style, kind of the pacing of it. That was very interesting because we definitely spent a lot of time on that first episode moving things around. We moved a lot of scenes around, and again, really making sure that we were with Griselda and really feeling her journey, spending that time with her. And so a lot of it was really, again, knowing kind of what moment exactly is that you just then cut to that reaction, right? For example, just sitting with it, pushing it till you're like, all right, it's just a feeling, I guess, But it was, again, just spending a lot of time, on these shots and these moments, really soaking it in and soaking up the world around our characters.
Amazing. I mean, I will say the vibes in Griselda were immaculate. And then Daniel, speaking of pacing, how did you determine the pacing of SPERMWORLD, and what factors influenced those timing decisions that you eventually made?
That is a good question, and a huge question too, because of course pacing is just so much of what we all have to do. And I think as Inbal knows very well, in a documentary, it's a particular challenge because you don't have the scripts, and so you basically are writing it every step of the process. And so there are some parts of SPERMWORLD where over 20 hours of footage get boiled down to about 5 minutes in the finished film. And then some places where 5 minutes play out more or less in real time. And so those sorts of pacing decisions are always ultimately writing questions about what story beat you're trying to represent for each of these main characters, and what is the best way to represent that. And sometimes what that means is taking tiny fragments of many different things across 2 weeks of footage and combining that into one sequence. And sometimes what it means is letting things play out at length and in detail. So that's always a difficult thing to figure out. And I think that one other reason that this project was particularly difficult is that it follows three main storylines throughout the film. And so each of those basically has to work more or less as a film on its own. Each of those storylines needs to feel satisfying in its own right. And then you have the additional problem of, well, how do you combine the three storylines into something that feels cohesive and where those narratives are speaking to one another instead of just operating completely on their own? And so I actually constructed each of the storylines with co-editor Emily Yu individually, and we had to basically make sure that each of those arcs felt satisfying on its own. And then there was this whole process of trial and error where we were combining them and trying to figure out, well, where do the beats feel like they're too similar to one another? They might feel redundant, or, for whatever reason, we're overstaying our welcome in one storyline rather than another. And so that was a whole process of just trying to figure out, well, how long can we stay here before we need to move on to the next one? When are we missing this storyline? And when could that contribute something new to the kind of understanding of this larger world of black market sperm donation? And then, of course, there's this entire other element, which is that so much of this takes place online. I mean, a lot of this is founded on relationships that start through messages that people send online saying, hey, I'm in Nashville and I'm ovulating this weekend. Is anybody available to provide me with a donation? And so those sorts of conversations have to be represented in some way. And a big part of this story is actually the world building around the entire digital environment in which this originates. And so one other element that affected the pacing here was that we had to find ways to represent the internet within the film as well. So there are these interludes where you have graphics on screen showing the conversations happening online. There are sections where our characters will be starting conversations with one another, and you'll basically hear them reading aloud their messages to one another, and sometimes see them in split screen or intercutting their two different perspectives to sort of create the sense that these are people who are forming a connection while also living separate lives. So it was those kinds of techniques, I think, that really added this additional fresh element to the pacing of the entire film.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's all about the externalization, right? And making it tangible for all the viewers who are riveted to the screen. That's fantastic. I think something that I've just personally enjoyed so much about my time with y'all is that everyone's projects are so different, but it's so palpable, just the love and the care and the technique that goes in that you have all brought to each project. So I'm going to say, let's rapid fire this in a little way, because I'm sure we could spend all night talking about it. But what do each of you hope that audiences take away from watching the project that you brought to life?
Personally, for me, I just hope they feel like they've been entertained and can walk away just saying, that kicked ass, I'm going to watch it again. Because to me, television is so engaging with their storylines. Like even a show like Gen V has messages to deliver about, how hard it is to live in this world, just in general. But that goes along with every project we have. I mean, obviously MÚSICA, that's just, synesthesia is just a beautiful way to express what happens in somebody's head, and you get to know people. And GRISELDA, which, by the way, I loved, you just see this woman's story that's just dark and just crazy. Everybody should see all of these things. Twin Flames was amazing. And I'm about to watch SPERMWORLD because I'm psyched. But to me, that's just want to watch it again, because that's how we communicate. And I think that's how people get to know each other.
Yeah. And that's the biggest compliment, right? Someone's like, rewind it, start it again. Anyone else?
I think empathy helps change hearts and minds. And I think if we manage to create empathy for these former members, then people are less judgmental and about what it's like to, having been susceptible or to join a cult, and have a little more, not only have empathy for that, but also recognize it in their own world. Many people write to us and say, oh, I recognize that in my own workplace or my own romantic relationship. I recognize this coercion dynamic in my church, or, so I would love for people to be more careful when they're joining groups or when they're engaging in coercive relationships.
It can happen to anyone too. I think it's so easy for us to watch, binged Twin Flames and be like, oh my God, they were crazy. But again, it's all about the building empathy and understanding where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, in addition to the gift of of us people who don't have synesthesia being able to see a representation of what it feels like inside someone's mind who does have this condition. Also, there's barely any, if any, movies that feature Brazilian Americans. So I hope all of us who are not of Brazilian descent have learned at the very minimum that Brazilians speak Portuguese and not Spanish. And just and for the people who are Brazilian American, I hope that they enjoyed and appreciated seeing their beautiful, vibrant, interesting, funny culture on screen, and that we did right by them.
That's fantastic. What about you, boys?
Well, I guess something that I really loved about working on SPERMWORLD is that it's so open to interpretation, and everybody comes at it with something very different, because reproduction is something that's so personal and so loaded. And so people often react to it in very strong ways right off the bat. But I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed and that I hope people continue to do is that they really sit with it in the days and weeks after watching the film and really think about unconventional ways of having kids and reflect on their own motives for wanting or not wanting kids. I think that it speaks to something very fundamental, even though it is about something that is ultimately kind of outlandish to a lot of people.
For sure.
Yeah, for me, I just hope people know that yes, Sofia Vergara is the real deal. I am, and no, I really, because I you know what, I was I'm a fan, since many years ago, where she was doing like travel videos, and so no, I mean, she deserves the respect. I mean, like I'm glad she killed it, and I'm sure people see it, and I'm very happy for her.
Something just, again, as a fan of that show as well, that I love too, and just if we're going to have a Sophia Stan moment, is that she created that opportunity for herself. No one was giving her that role, those dramatic roles. And she said, okay, I'll just be Griselda on my own, and made a killer series.
Yes, much respect to her.
Yes. And then another quick piece of advice going down the line of all these brilliant editors before me. What is one thing that you wish you knew when you started out as an editor?
Okay, I'm going to start on a very practical level that I would recommend reprogramming your keyboard so that when you hit save, instead of Command S, and for copy paste, anything else that takes 2 keys, reprogram your keyboard so that it's just 1 key, and you will save yourself from a lifetime of wear and tear on your thumb.
Queen.
My very similar. Use an ergonomic mouse. Anything to be kinder to your body as you get started, and you won't have these problems that then it takes us years to. Editing is hard on your body, so anything you do for your wrists, for your back, for your butt, it's all good idea.
Yeah,
truly.
On a related note, I also just think that in addition to needing to take care of your body, it's also just important to get out of your head as an editor. Like, you actually, I think, do need to be, for the creative work, more in tune with what's happening in your body. And so I think it's helpful to do things like, I don't know, whether it's running or dancing or whatever it is that you prefer doing that gets you out of your head and into your body. I think that really helps you just respond in a visceral way to footage.
And take lunch and get out of your office.
Always take lunch.
Absolutely.
I think for me, it would be, I was talking to my assistant, Jen Rosenthal, who is the best. Everybody should hire her, but nobody's going to get her for me. Is don't take notes personally. Like, you're going to get notes. It's a process. Everybody has an opinion. It's about just putting yourself out there as big and bad as you can. You're never going to hit a home run, or you hit a home run and they just can't see it. I mean, just try it. And if it doesn't work, hopefully they'll know you did they'll eventually go back to what you did. But you gotta have a little bit of a thick skin on it.
I think one thing I always say too is, just as a writer and a creator who's doing this in like a different stage of production, is when I'm showing my work to people, it's like, it's not the Hunger Games, y'all. Like, no one's going to kill you if they give you, like, note does not equal death. It's going to be okay.
Well, that's what I always say to people. Like, you got to take chances on your edits, because what are they going to say? No? Like, that's so what?
That's what we're here for, our point of view.
Yeah.
What about you, Joaquin?
For me, something that a big piece of advice that I received actually 2 times in my life that were like 10 years apart was to not make it about the money. I think, I always knew, for example, that I wanted to work in film and in scripted TV and the narrative space. But, I always got caught up in just, taking work because I got a paycheck, and I didn't follow, honestly, my dream, what I always wanted to do. And so I was told, like, focus on just getting the right experience, meeting the right people, telling the stories you want to tell, and, the money will come later, right? I mean, and so I just, it would have saved me a lot of time, honestly, from just going after, again, what I always wanted to do. So that's what I would say. Amazing advice from a Hollywood editing mentor.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I don't know about everyone listening and everyone here, but I feel like I learned so much this evening, and I just had the best time today. Thank you so much to our panelists, Melissa, Maura, Daniel, Inbal, and Joaquin, for being here with us today to discuss your incredible, beautifully, richly varied work. And also thank you to Impact 24 PR for putting this panel together, for letting me speak to all of you. And then to everyone out there for watching and listening. And then also be sure to check out the Hollywood Editing Mentor podcast for other panels and interviews.